is Stigma, where we talk with leaders from many industries about how mental health and addiction have impacted their lives. Many people suffer silently from mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, and trauma. They never seek help because of stigma. In this podcast, host Stephen Hayes and his guests share their stories of recovery in order to encourage others to do the same. Here's Stephen.
Welcome back to the Stigma Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Hayes, and today we are talking about how video games can help treat mental health differences. Our guest is Dr. Adam Gazzaley. Adam is currently a professor of neurology, psychiatry, and physiology at UCSF in San Francisco. He's also the co-founder and chief scientist at Jazz Venture Partners, one of the leading venture investors in what they define as human performance. They've invested in the likes of Akili Interactive, Therapeutics, Thrive Global, Halo Neuroscience, and many others. Adam is also the co-founder and chief science advisor at Akili Interactive, as well as the co-founder of SynSync. And to be honest, every time I turn around in the mental health or digital health space, I feel like I'm running into Adam. So it's a pleasure, it's a joy to get to have him on and explain some of the science and the neuroscience around video games and what Akili's doing. And so without further ado, I just want to get into it. Adam, thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So every time I turn around, I find you in the mental health space. It feels like you're involved in everything interesting that's going on, from investing to building to teaching to researching. And so I kind of want to just get a sense from you of how you found your way into the mental health space.
Yeah, it's been exciting to interact with this field from so many different perspectives. The way I look at it, it's, these are all pieces of a big ecosystem that all need to be advancing from the academics, entrepreneurship, investment side to make a big difference. So for me, it's just been a slow process over 30 years when I started in neuroscience and neurology, all the way to today, where I get to interact with this field from all the different perspectives you mentioned. So it's really been a fun and gratifying journey so far.
And so, what drew you to the startup space with respect to mental health and digital therapeutics? How did you find your way to creating a business or a solution like Akili?
Well, for me, it was really out of necessity, which I think is true for a lot of startup founders. It's not just like, I want to create a business. What should that business be? But I think the most successful ones are created out of need, where you recognize that you want something to exist and it's not happening. And so the only way there is to create it, to surround yourself by great people and, just put your heart into it and build it from scratch. And so for me, I had never thought I would start a business, certainly something that's grown as big as Akili, really on the academic side. I'm an MD, PhD, full professor at a university. But I always had this dream of doing things that were not just academic, not just intellectual pursuits, but actually building things that help people. And what became apparent to me as I started creating and inventing and doing research and showing that we were having a meaningful effect on our participants' attention abilities, was that I started realizing this is a product, this is a treatment that I believe has the ability to get into the real world and help people. And it was with that realization that the dawning of realization came to me that I could not accomplish that bigger goal within academics. Academics has a really important place in this, larger landscape of creation of new medicine, but the building and the scaling of products is not its forte. And so for me, it was really just figuring out, how do I just continue the journey, which started with an idea and a patent and a research study, to getting it to people. And the natural progression was to create a company.
And so that company is Akili, right? And at a high level, how would you describe it? I mean, when I look at the material online, when I follow the business, I describe it as a digital therapeutics business focused on improving cognitive functions. And I think the go-to-market strategy is really this video game as a digital therapeutic, right? Am I saying that correctly, or would you describe the business differently than that?
No, I think that's an accurate description. If someone asks me and I just want to respond with just several words, I would say it's a therapeutic video game company. I don't believe that the only things Akili will create as the years go on and we get bigger and have more verticals and have a lot of new products will only be video games. But for right now, that's the core technology that I developed. I'm the inventor of on that patent that was started at UCSF and then was licensed by Akili. And so it forms the heart of our whole, sort of endeavor, both on the development side. We have a, full AAA video game creation team now, but also on the clinical side. So almost 30 clinical trials later, and now our recent FDA clearance, which we could talk about. All of that on both sides really revolve around this core technology, which is a video game. It's a closed loop video game. That's some of the technical details, but to a patient who will be receiving this first of its kind medicine in the near future, it'll feel like a video game. So that's usually how I describe it.
So I want to have you explain to people why a video game can be a therapeutic. Why? Because I think a lot of people are sitting there thinking, what are people playing Fortnite and they're getting mental health help? And that's not the case, right? This is a closed loop system that provides some sort of stimulation, measures your reaction to that stimulation, and then adjusts itself to fit to how you're doing, right? So how does that work? And when we use the term video game, how should people think about what that product is?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back from video game or even digital technology and recognize that experiences, which a video game is just one example of an experience, but it is an experience. Experiences change our brain. Our brain has this phenomena people are growing increasingly familiar with called neuroplasticity. And that is the ability of a brain that allows us to learn, modify our structure and chemistry, our physiology in response to experiences. And experiences have been used for millennia to both increase the quality of our lives, music, dance, story, games themselves, but also as therapeutic approaches like ancient meditation and mindfulness practices. So the idea of an experience as medicine for the mind is not a new one. It's actually quite ancient. I think the unique aspect of what we've done is take that concept of an experience as medicine and then use modern technology, all the sensors and the machine learning algorithms and reward systems that we've learned from the video game domain to create an experience that can be targeted to different cognitive systems that you want to improve, can be closed loop, which you mentioned, so be it adaptive to the performance. And now what we're doing is even adapted to the state, the neural state, the physiological state of the patient or participant in a study. And so that allows us to now deliver experiences in a very reproducible way. The reproducibility allows it to be testable in randomized controlled trials in a way that real-world experiences, non-digitally delivered experiences really struggle with. So, it's the story is more complex, right? The basis is that this is an experiential medicine. That's what I think the core of what we've done that's exciting. And it's a new era of experiential medicine because it takes that very basic principle, but delivers it and targets it and makes it personalized in a very unique way. And we decided to deliver this particular digital experience through a video game because I think that is a really powerful type of experience for a medicine. It leads to deep engagement through the enjoyment and the reward systems, which is critical to change the brain and to change any aspect of our physiology. That fun and engagement also leads to better compliance and sustainable engagement over time. And, populations like children who don't always like to take their medicine find it tastier than most other medicines. And so, for all those reasons, this particular experiential medicine is delivered as a video game, but it doesn't have to be. But that's what I've really focused on for the last decade.
How else could it be delivered? In the future, what would be other delivery methods for this medicine?
Well, first of all, it doesn't even have to be digital, but there's incredible assets as I just described to the digital delivery, right? So you can rapidly update the challenges and the rewards of the experience based upon real-time data. So that's very hard to do without, a digital closed loop system. But the rewards and the art and the story and the music could be very high, where, it is a game. There are particular type of game mechanics and goals that people, feel like they're playing a game. Or it could be a lot lower. Like, for example, we have a closed loop digital treatment called MetaTrain, which is based on principles of concentrated meditation. And it's barely a game. I certainly don't describe it the way we describe in Endeavor, Akili's game, as a true video game. There are rewards. You could follow your progress over time, but you play it with your eyes closed. It's lower on the game mechanics. So when I say it doesn't have to be delivered through a video game, it doesn't have to have all that same type of mechanics that go into a video game, but it could still be a digital treatment.
And so Endeavor RX is the platform that was approved, or the game that was approved by the FDA back in June. Am I getting that right?
Yep. Endeavor RX. Yeah, it's gone through multiple different names. When it was in my laboratory at UCSF back in 2008 and 2009, when I first came up with this idea, it was called NeuroRacer. And that was the game that we published the results of in Nature in 2013. When it moved to Akili as a technology for them to develop a much better game, but use that same underlying methodology, it went through a period of time which was called Project Evo. There are several papers with that name. And then Endeavor RX is the recently announced go-to-market name for that video game. And that was just recently cleared by the FDA as a Class 2 medical device to treat inattention in children with ADHD.
What was that like going to the FDA with a video game? I mean, is this the first time the FDA has approved a video game as some sort of digital therapeutic or medicine?
Yeah, it is. It is the first. So, I always say, like, the future's unpredictable, but when you have a first, it's always the first. And so it's gratifying after a 12-year journey for me personally, from that very first idea of a video game to improve attention to this approval, really marks it as the first cleared video game by the FDA for any clinical condition. And in this particular case, the first digital non-drug treatment for ADHD, which is really exciting because there's so much need by these children for a treatment and the need for opportunity and options outside of drugs. So it is a first. And to answer your question directly, what was it like going to the FDA with such a novel treatment? It was daunting. We had a whole team of professionals and FDA consultants and medical device, career professionals that were working with us. We pre-submitted the study design to the FDA. So everything was done as rigorously and as buttoned up as possible. This was done by a CRO, so like a professional research team that does randomized controlled trials out of Duke. I actually wasn't even an author on that study. And it was a double-blind randomized controlled trial with a placebo game on 8 to 12-year-olds with ADHD. It took, almost 2 years for that study. It was multiple sites involved, 350 children. So it was a really, that's the first part of that particular FDA journey, which was the pre-submission followed by the big, long phase 3 research study, then followed by a couple of years in the review process where we, had to help wrap multiple heads around the fact that we're telling them this video game is medicine and it should be thought of as medicine, just like a drug is. It should be prescribed, hopefully eventually reimbursed like medicine. And, it wasn't the easiest process. We were also encumbered by the fact that this is a de novo pathway, meaning the FDA has two different pathways for new treatments, whether it's a drug or a device. It could be de novo, meaning it's completely new and doesn't rest upon any past indications, or it could be have a predicate, meaning that it's already following a long line of similar treatments. And since this was the first, it's de novo, and the de novo pathway is notoriously longer and more challenging, as we verified.
So you explained that this is being used to treat ADHD in children. I want to ask you how it treats the ADHD. How does it make the child better? But I think the place to start might be on just a quick overview of what is ADHD. I mean, everybody talks about it. Everybody talks about I think most people don't actually know exactly what's going on in the brain. Can you just articulate for us what ADHD is?
Sure. It's super complicated and a longer discussion, but these conditions are really defined based really on symptomatology, not based on what happens in the brain. And that's true of many mental health conditions. And it's problematic because it doesn't have like the clear biomarkers of something like diabetes or high cholesterol or hypertension does, where you're like, okay, you're there, oh, you're not there, right? So we, as a field, constantly in psychiatry, the DSM is the manual we use to diagnose these conditions, are constantly redefining them, which is challenging for us to wrap our heads around frequently. But it's really a constellation of symptoms that an individual can experience, usually children, but there's adult ADHD. There's a recent new interest in even senior ADHD. And it really has two different components. One is the pure attentional part, which is, in the name itself. And that's usually difficulty with distraction, holding information in mind, very short term, sustaining attention, particularly in very boring environments. And then there's the other side, the more motoric side of it, where it's expressed as hyperactivity, fidgetiness, difficulty, and just basically sitting still. They're not really the same thing. We don't think they're the same thing in the brain. We see that there are some children that have both, which is the majority, but often it does present itself just as hyperactivity and just as attention. So there's really like three types of ADHD. And, it's really disruptive. I would say the hyperactive part is usually more disruptive to the teachers and the parents than the pure inattention part, which may get not as noticed because it's sort of not as disruptive to people around them. But they're there and they lead to decreases in performance in school and behavioral challenges with socialization. They could be related to other conditions like autism, dyslexia. So, there's a lot of overlap between many of these childhood learning conditions. And so they're not pure in that sense, and they influence each other as well. So, it's not as easy as just putting buckets around each of these and saying, this is that, and it's not these other things. So we're slowly wrapping our heads around the fact that we need to think about these more from the neural perspective or the cognitive underlying systems perspective rather than just symptomatic. And so that's a little bit of a background of what ADHD is.
So my understanding is that the way we treated ADHD so far is with molecules, with some sort of medicine, a digestible physical medicine like a Ritalin or Vyvanse or one of these drugs that people are familiar with. How does a video game replace taking a medication? How does a video game make me better if I have ADHD? And how does that compare to the way a drug or molecule would make me better?
Yeah, so I'll answer it in two ways. First, I'll do it sort of at the 30,000 foot global perspective. And I view medicines for the mind as, there's really two classes. There's the molecular medicine, which is the paradigm that we're in, right? Some people will literally equate medicine with drug, which is not true, right? Medicine is an approach to improve health, and drug is definitely a very popularly used one, but not necessarily the only potential tool. And so molecular medicine, it's been widely used. Obviously, it's for ADHD. It's really the only treatment out there that is obtainable right now with approval. There's some other devices that are just not, I don't think you can even purchase them yet. So that, there's a movement to think beyond the pill, but the pill right now is the status quo, certainly for ADHD and many, many other mental health conditions, as I'm sure everyone is aware. And those work by changing, the neurochemistry. And they have sometimes really, really positive, and very therapeutic roles in helping many, many people. And so I don't want to dismiss that. But they are not targeted in the way that we always hoped they would be to the neural networks in the brain. And because they work rather broadly and without specificity on neurotransmitter systems that act across many aspects of cognition, you can get many side effects, personality changes, and negative effects as well, which we all know is part of the challenge of molecular medicine. And then there are those parents and children that don't want to take a drug during these developmental stages. So there's definitely positive things about it. It's not like this is just some horrible, evil route, but it's certainly not a complete solution. And it's not a solution for many people. And that's quite clear. And that's true for other things, depression, autism, traumatic brain injury. And we move into my world of neurology, and you see it for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and MS. We need more refined solutions for improving cognition. I feel pretty strongly about that. And so now to get specific, this particular treatment from back even in my early research and development of this treatment, which is 12 years ago now, so back 2009, 2010, when we started doing the first studies, what we found was in different populations. We've now replicated this in multiple populations, but the first study published in Nature in 2013 was in healthy older adults. And what we found was that this particular closed-loop video game, we now have many others, but this particular one, by challenging an individual to focus their attention on a goal and then rapidly move their attention to other goals and resist distraction, just really challenging the full, breadth of their cognitive control abilities, would lead to these benefits that we were able to quantify in abilities that were not necessarily being directly challenged in the game, but emerged as benefits, what we call transfer of benefits, by getting better at the game, right? That's what we're trying to do, not just get better at the game. And so specifically what I mean is that we found that when we tested individuals before and after a month of gameplay, and this is true of older adults as it's true what we found in these children with ADHD, and we test them on really boring tests of attention. They're not like a video game at all. There's no color, there's no reward. You sit in a dark room and just respond to very rare targets. It's called a vigilance test. It's designed to be boring. That what we find is that even though you're playing a game that has all the reward mechanics and colors and lights and multitasking of a regular game, you are then able to apply your attentional skills in this very different context. And this is very much the context that children with ADHD suffer the most in a classroom, in this boring setting that they're not motivated to engage. And so that's why we were so excited. And that's why we pursued this route with the FDA, because we wound up improving this ability of children, and now we know this is true for other populations as well, to deploy their attention and sustain it even in a non-motivating, boring environment. And so it does that by enhancing the ability of individuals to activate these attention networks, when they're being asked to.
So these attention networks, do we have any way to compare how effective our impact on them is with these digital therapeutics versus the molecules or the drugs? And is one better or worse, or do you need to use them together?
Yeah, we haven't done that study yet. It is in our future. And I'm very, very interested in the intersection and the potential synergistic effects between molecular medicine and experiential medicine. We could come back to that. There's hardly any research anywhere across any conditions really understanding how they work together. This is like one of the biggest crimes I feel that we have committed over the last 70 years, is that we put these silos around things. It's not that molecular medicine is not good. It's just, it should never have been just put in a category on its own, right? The idea of like this magic brain pill that's just going to fix everything was silly, and we've never accomplished that. But it does have different assets potentially than these experiential treatments. Like, for example, with ADHD, we know that a lot of the benefits are in the hyperactivity itself. It really chills children out, so to speak, and helps with that behavior and that fidgetiness and that those type of motoric aspects. While our treatment seems to potentially have some benefit in that, but much more on the inattention side, as I said, the sustained attention. So we don't really tell people not to take molecular medicine, right? Although we did our study with children, the phase 3 trial out of Duke, they were not taking any drugs at the time. So that study was done as a monotherapy. But we certainly are not saying that this should be a replacement for everything else, that it is a piece of, probably a larger solution treatment package that will help on the many aspects of these conditions. They're not just like one single thing that's off. So that's part of the future, is to understand how they may work together. I dream of a day that we'll be able to reduce the doses of the molecules because we have beneficial effects from experiential treatments, and then that will decrease the side effects. So the side effects are really caused because we don't have the specificity. We have to increase the doses too high.
Why are video games just now being used as therapy? Right? Why has it not happened before? And is it going to become more prevalent and even more so outside of just this use case with ADHD?
It's been a while now, over 15 years that papers started coming out showing that video games, even consumer video games, even like first-person shooter games, the games that many people have the most problems with because of their violent content, can benefit cognition. It's not incredibly surprising, when you think about the brain and plasticity and realize that these games, many games, and, games is it's a big field. There's many different types of games that can have different types of benefits and different types of harm, right? I mean, wherever there's good, there could be harm. And that's why we approach our studies so carefully to look for side effects as well. But we've known for a while that there are positive benefits of action-based games, like fast, rapid decision-making and perceptual challenges like we have in our games and many other games, even consumer games have, on improving cognitive abilities. I think some of the challenges with taking it to where we have now is that we believe that we can do better by formulating the game in a very targeted way, as we've done here. We think that closed-loop video games are better than open-loop games because they become more personalized. They allow a larger segment of the population to take that type of medicine, where it's not just, some games are just too hard, for example, for older adults, they're just too fast. So designing and developing a video game as a medicine is an entire process that involves understanding, of course, all the complexities of game mechanics and the art and the music and the story side of it, with the particular mechanics that target the neural systems as we designed at my center at UCSF. And then there's the really long, slow validation process that involves lots of people, lots of money, lots of time and patience to go through the validation steps that you need to do to give people confidence that this treatment is having a meaningful effect, or at least this is what the effect is, right? We could say that with certainty because we've done the careful study. So I think that all those pieces that I described to you, which took a decade, has really prevented video games from advancing to this point, despite the fact that many, many scientists know and feel confident that there are meaningful benefits that are engendered by video games. And I think we will be seeing a lot more of this. I know there's a lot of work going on out there. And hopefully this is a model of how it is possible will open up other activities from different scientists and different companies.
On that idea of the model of what's possible, if I were to ask you what is possible, where do you think this goes in 10, 20, 50 years? What are the long-term impacts of what you've uncovered here?
That's my favorite question. I love living in the future. It's sort of how I wound up in this video game therapeutic role in the first place. I'm constantly trying to look for what's next, at least a decade in the future. And that's a lot of the work that we do at Neuroscape, which is our research center at UCSF. And so, it's a long answer. I'll just give you some tidbits and we could dive in any of them if you want. So, the first thing, I'm going to go in no particular order, is really increasing the sophistication of the closed loop. So Akili's game, Endeavor RX, we're very excited about what we've shown in our research and the fact that it's going to advance as the first medicine of its type very soon. It could be much more sophisticated and not just adapting the challenges and rewards based upon behavior on the performance, which is what it does now, but on physiology and neural activity itself. So we're advancing a program at Neuroscape that we call multimodal biosensing. And the goal is to use many, many different sensors to understand the state of an individual, their stress, their attention, their arousal, the valence, whether it's positive or negative, in real time and process that data within milliseconds and then feed it into this engine that then feeds back an environment that can also be richer. So right now, the game is played on a phone or a tablet. That's an incredible asset for the obvious reasons that, it's ubiquitous, it's very scalable. People already have these devices. But I see a future where virtual reality, what it will become, a true multi-sensory, really deeply immersive experiences and even types of augmented reality will be the output of this. And then in the middle of the closed loop, with the data coming in and this environmental stimulation going out, there's an incredible opportunity for machine learning and advances in artificial intelligence. So you have a truly adaptive, intelligent system that senses you in the moment and then creates an environment to help you maintain and optimize yourself across many different domains. I think that's a really exciting and challenging future, but it's the direction that we're heading in. This is the beginning of that potential to really use interactive experiences in digital technology and machine learning to build tools that really enhance what makes us human, not to just offload everything to some machine that's going to be doing it for you, but to help us elevate ourselves.
What makes us human? I know that, we could probably spend 2 hours on that, but what's the thing that a machine can do to enhance the thing that makes us unique versus that machine?
Well, it's the complexity of what we do and how we interact with the world that I think defines that the most. It's not just that we're decision makers and perceptual computational systems. And we have those abilities and we move through space, but we feel, we care, we have empathy, compassion, we accumulate wisdom, we are future thinking, all of these sort of nuances of us that we don't see in machines is really what I'm talking about. Sure, we can enhance our ability to focus our attention, but we also need to enhance our empathy and compassion. I think what we're seeing in the world right now is a clear indication that we failed in that regard. And so that's one of the domains that I'm really excited about, is to build up the more perceptual, motoric, and the basic building blocks of cognition. But those higher level abilities that really, I think, define us as human, that is the true goal. And if we don't get there, all the knowledge and information in the world is not going to help. We're not going to deal with things like climate change and global pandemics very effectively if we don't have those other higher abilities. And I think that this type of experiential medicine that we're really just at the beginning of creating has a possibility to help us there.
Is it safe to say that one of the greatest outcomes of technological advancement is that we can now use the tech to make us better and to fix the things that are wrong with us? Because a lot of people hate on tech and say that, addiction to Facebook and addiction to video games, and there's all these bad outcomes of tech. But what I'm hearing here is that the technology we've developed is probably the thing that's going to fix us in the long run.
I mean, that's my thesis, right? That's sort of what I'm doing here. That's my life goal right now. And I've written about the other side and have researched the other side. I wrote a book called The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World, where I really talk about a lot of the challenges that technology has posed for us as humans. And it's real. And it should be recognized, because recognizing it allows us to not recreate some of the mistakes we've made and to build better. But I am incredibly optimistic about a future where our technology is not tearing us down or being used to make us lazy and to offload us of things that are natural to us, but to really enhance us. That is my goal in life, is to help that process happen. And I think what we've done here with Endeavor RX becoming a clear treatment is one step. I mean, it's a big one. I'm very proud of it. It was, over a decade of activities by hundreds of people trying to, make that happen. But it is really just one piece of the larger ecosystem of technology tools to help us that I, want to see happen.
So zooming out a little bit, for the entrepreneurs that are listening to this, to the aspiring entrepreneurs that are listening to this, where is the white space around your thesis? If I'm an entrepreneur, I'm hearing this today, and I think, man, I'd love to be in and around that space, where are the opportunities to build adjacent to what you're doing?
I mean, there are so many opportunities, which I think is the good part and the challenge as well. It's certainly not like a unimodal activity where you just have this one skill set that leads to this future that I was sort of envisioning. There's all the clinical skills, right? Psychiatrists, psychologists, neurologists, therapists of all sorts that are bringing, a true deep understanding of the human condition, the needs that we face, and, the real deep understanding of what people need and where we're vulnerable and where we need to grow. And that is critical, right? You can't have the type of impact that I was describing just as a pure tech move, right? It really needs to be baked deeply with the humanistic side of it. But then on the other side, it is a really, sophisticated and complex technological challenge. And that is broad. I mean, from, individuals that have skills on the algorithm side and machine learning, there's a lot of opportunity there. On sensor technology, hardware development, as we said, we create environments. So people that build experiences, whether they're artists or musicians or storytellers, you experts, all of those skill sets have a role in this. And when we create our teams to build new prototypes, which we do all the time in this domain, we bring together multidisciplinary teams like I just described. I mean, all of those people are part of our teams. So yeah, I think anyone that's listening that feels excited about that future and has anything on those, long lists of skills that I just rattled through, there's a place for you to bring that expertise to this goal.
What about investors? What advice do you have for investors that want to get involved in this space, that want exposure to this space, maybe digital therapeutics, maybe mental health more broadly around digital therapeutics? How should investors be thinking about getting involved here and funding things that are doing good, not funding things that aren't really based in science or aren't going to help people?
Yeah, that's yet another complex but good question. I interact with this world a bit. I'm a co-founder and a science advisor for a venture fund called Jazz Venture Partners. We have several funds now within that firm. It's been a really exciting part of my journey over the last decade is to, as I said, as we sort of started this conversation, I started this as an academic and then became, sort of tech developer, but within academics, and then an entrepreneur. And now I've had the opportunity to be on the other side of the table and to help guide and advise for investments of other companies, not my companies, that are creating in this space. And it's really been exciting to see both sides of that equation, the people that need the money and the people that want to deploy that money to make a difference and to make money as well. It's a really complicated investment space in my mind because it's changing so rapidly. But for the right investor, I think it really is an incredible opportunity. I think that what we've seen even recently with our own successes with Akili, showing that the FDA will clear medical devices different as a video game from what they've ever seen before is a really positive sign. I think what we're seeing right now because of COVID, the increase in acceptance and the real show of the power of telemedicine, again, another digital solution to some of the challenges we face is another really positive check mark and milestone for these fields. So I think that it takes an investor that, has, I wouldn't say the highest level, risk tolerance, but certainly one that's able to envision a future where technology is beyond entertainment and communication. Not that those things are wrong, but that's the opportunity here. That's the vision. That those are pieces of it, but we're going to see technology elevate every aspect of the human experience. And someone that sees that vision, I think now has some of the milestones they need to de-risk those investments a bit and to be a little bit more confident about them, where they might not have had that 2 or 3 years ago, or even a year ago. And then I'd say the last thing is to reach out to experts and scientists that can help an investment team that may not have that domain expertise to wrap their heads around what's been shown here. And it doesn't mean that it needs to have full phase 3 trials done in order to invest in it. This is a very individual decision about what level you're willing to invest in a company. But it is important, I think, if you want to invest in a company that is building into regulated spaces like we've been discussing, or even non-regulated spaces, but where you want to have truly validated tools, you really want to make sure it's not all marketing, that there is a healthy respect for the science, how hard it is, how expensive it is, and how long it takes.
One of the questions I like to wrap up with as we get to the end of our time here, especially when I'm talking to someone who's smarter than me and knows more than I do about the industry that I'm in, is what did I not ask? What questions should I have asked here that I didn't?
I really enjoyed this discussion. It was really broad. Sometimes they're very linear, but you really were able to sort of stimulate me to wax poetic about a lot of the things I'm excited about, both on, as broadly as we've just discussed, from investment to entrepreneurship to academics and the future, which is my favorite place to talk about. Maybe a question that you asked me but you didn't talk about, I'll just give a little bit because I think your audience might find it interesting. You asking about the future, and I just sort of picked one, which was the increased sophistication of the closed loop. But I also, and I alluded to this earlier when we were talking about how things like Ritalin or Adderall might work very well with our video game synergistically. I alluded to the intersection of molecular medicine and experiential medicine. I am now really excited about the potential future where experiential technologies can be used to both increase the personalization and the precision of psychedelic treatments. So, a perfect example, I think, of molecular meets experiential. We have already started a research program at Neuroscape at my center at UCSF to start advancing that goal, which is going to involve both multimodal biosensing during psychedelic treatments. I think your audience may have some awareness that these treatments are really showing some very encouraging results on the studies that have been being performed.
We just invested in 2 psychedelic startups, and we're about to close the third. So I'm all in.
So there you go. So I'm glad I brought it up. And we're looking at it from a very different perspective than a lot of the other academic and maybe even companies out there, in that we're really focused on how the set and setting, the contextual elements, the experiential pieces of the treatment can be optimized so that it is more personalized. And everyone in the field believes that makes sense, that's true, that you can change the experience to lead to better outcomes. But the research is not really there yet. And so that's what we're doing right now. And I think bringing these two worlds together is a very exciting part of our future when we think about mental health solutions.
Yeah, I think what's interesting there to me intellectually is that there's this revolutionary treatment, which is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. It's getting incredible outcomes versus other historical accepted methods or modes of treatment. And I think we might not know exactly why. And so I think gathering the data from these outcomes and figuring out exactly what does and doesn't have a big impact is going to be really important to advancing the science around using these tools, using these compounds to facilitate separation of ego and psychotherapy and making advancements as humans.
Yep. I mean, that's exactly what we're starting to do. That's the research protocols that we're writing right now and submitting to the DEA to start doing. And I'm, I very much consider myself a translational neuroscientist now. I want to understand how things work, how the brain works. I always have. 30 years I've been doing this, but my real goal now is to help people directly. That's my primary mission. And so the goal of learning how to optimize the experience that occurs during a psychedelic treatment, yes, we want to learn how these compounds work, how the brain changes by them, but for the goal of making them more effective and really helping people as rapidly as possible, because the need is so great now. And so that's why I'm motivated. I think there's tons of potential for these worlds to come together.
We should put our heads together on that sometimes, because there's a lot in that space that I'm excited about, and I think it's gonna really save a lot of lives. To be honest, I think there's a lot of people that have diseases, that have addictions, that have mental health differences that are treatment resistant, or they're hard to diagnose, and they're not in the right treatment, or the treatment's not effective for them, and they're giving up because they think that maybe something's wrong with them, and they just haven't found the right thing. And I think the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is going to be the right thing for a lot of these people who've kind of given up on ever getting help or getting well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Well, look, this has been great. I appreciate you spending time with me. I appreciate you educating our audience and educating me. I learned a lot from this conversation. So just thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I hope your audience enjoyed it as well. It's always fun for me to just think creatively about the future and also explain a little bit what's under the hood of the things that we've been working on. So thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I just want to say another special thank you to Adam for being here and for taking time with us today. I think a lot of people will find that conversation insightful, helpful, educational. I'm probably going to have to listen to it a couple of times to actually understand everything he told me. So thank you again, Adam, for being here. To our listeners, thank you for being here as well. Please, if you like the content, hook us up with a subscribe or a like or a review on your podcast platform of choice, and share us with a friend if you'd like. If you'd like to support us and the content we create, then you can find us on Patreon as well. I will link to that in the show notes. To the founders out there, don't forget to join the Mental Health Startup Slack community, which you can also find a link to in the show notes. And we have a new segment we've launched recently called the Founder Spotlight that consists of 5 3-minute pitches from founders in the mental health space. Nothing is filtered, nothing is edited. It's just a chance for us to leverage our platform to bring more awareness to more founders in our space. So look for a link for that in the show notes as well. And most importantly, we want to hear from you. If you want to comment on social media, we're on Twitter at StigmaCast and Instagram at Stigma Podcast. You can email us info@StigmaPodcast. And you can find us online at stigmapodcast.com. Thank you again for being here. That's it. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thank you for your support.